Good. Good.
We can't test sound though, so.
Oh yeah, I can't test sound.
So I'm Griffin. I've been with the club for 2.5 years now, I think. I'm a senior in electrical and computer engineering, and I'm going to be telling you how to transition from Unity to Unreal, but other way around. So in this talk, I'm basically speedrunning it, just to get a bunch of what I call existing knowledge. So maybe you won't necessarily retain exactly what I'm saying as I'm saying it, but maybe later you'll be like, oh, he said something about this. I can go look further into it, because it's hard to know what you don't know. But if I kind of show parts of it, you'll be able to look it up later in your own time. I'm also making this presentation available. It's in the club drive right now, so we'll just have to email a link or something. And we're taking video of it so you can watch it again in case I say stuff that goes more in depth than what's in the slides. But I put a bunch of stuff in the speaker's notes, so you can follow it along. Okay. So on the highest level, what's really different? I read an article that was saying that Unreal is better when you have a large group with a bunch of specialists. So one person does the programming, another person does or another team does the art, graphics, everything. And Unity is kind of the other way around. How I think that it kind of differentiates itself is that Unreal has a lot more structure and rules that would carry over from project to project, because they have things called specified as actors. They have set rules where everything kind of has to follow them, which can make a great outline for someone who already knows what they're doing, but makes it really hard to go in and do a quick project because you have to follow by all the rules. Where in Unity you kind of make up your own rules, which makes it a lot easier to learn and can let you do a lot of things faster. Also, I said supposedly you can make 2D games. I've never seen it in Unreal, but I've seen plenty in Unity, and they have some great tutorials on that on their site as well as on YouTube. The biggest difference, Unity uses C#, which if you're not familiar, but you are familiar with Java, you are familiar with it. They're very similar, at least in my application. I'm sure when you dive really deep, you'll find differences. But on the surface and for most of the stuff when you're starting out, you'd be really good. And then Unreal uses C++, as I'm sure if you've been working at it, you've seen. And they also use the blueprints, which can look like that. Hopefully, yours never looked like that. But, God. Unity has a bit different structure when it comes to blueprints, or not blueprints, but what they call prefabs. It's completely different design philosophy. They can do kind of the same thing, but I prefer prefabs, and we'll see why. Also, I love the community support as well as the documentation for Unity, and I've had a ton of trouble with Unreal, so that's why we are switching. So this is a little less specific, but I felt like it's good to know when looking at two different game engines, kind of what the game engine's doing behind the scenes. At least it helps me when I'm programming. I am a programmer after all, so maybe this isn't the most interesting for non-programmers, but I was doing an interview at a game company, and they asked me what a game loop was. I didn't know then, so I went and looked it up. And basically, where a normal program might have you enter the program, do a couple processing things, maybe it waits for the user to put some input in, processes it, and then it exits. A game doesn't do that. A game has a bunch of stuff going on in the background when the user isn't putting any information in. So it has to keep processing and do it at a fast rate. So the highest level, what a game engine is doing is it holds the program flow in a while loop. And every frame, so let's say we're doing 60 frames per second, it goes through these steps. Process info would be, since the last frame, did the player press this button? Update game is going through all of the code, like changes or whatever, like updating the state of the game, and then render is showing it, and then it waits here until time for the next frame, just to keep it a synchronized 60 frames per second. There's a bunch of stuff that you can do with this. We don't have to configure it because Unity and Unreal have already done it for us. If you're familiar with Unreal, like this part of it is called tick. In Unity, basically the same thing as update. It's the update function. It kind of looks like that, and that's where a lot of the code goes. If you want to read more about it, I put the link on here so you can check it later. I'm assuming since a bunch of people have computers that most of us have already installed Unity, but there's one thing that I want to make sure you have. Well, now they have this like Unity hub, so you can keep track of all of the different versions of Unity that you have on your computer. It's a nice way to keep track of everything, so download that. Yeah, that's what it looks like on which versions you have. But the big thing that I think gets overlooked is setting up Visual Studio right. This is typically only a problem when you already have Visual Studio installed, and then when you install Unity, it doesn't prompt you to say, connect it to Unity with their like Unity package or whatever. So then you kind of get, the functionality it gives you is like this autocomplete. So whenever you start typing something, it'll tell you, oh, it looks like this. I'm sure if you've done any programming, you've seen IDEs do this. So I just need to make sure that you have that on there. It's a great tool. It tells you like quickly what kind of things you're about to finish typing. Now I kind of go through the steps here, but this is more reference for if you're coming back and reading it. But yeah, just game development with Unity. Just open the installer and then click on that package. So yeah, I'll give you that autocomplete. Unity's documentation is one of the strongest parts of Unity. It looks like this. You find it just by searching on Google, Unity documentation, and then it tells you a little bit about every function or class or anything inside of Unity within the scripting API. But also in the manual, if you're just a level designer or artist or whoever that's going in messing with the editor, but maybe not really the code, the manual will tell you how to use things from the editor side. So it's useful for everyone working within Unity. And finally, we're to the fun part. So this is Unreal, just what the default level looks like, and this is Unity, what the default level looks like. You'll see that a lot of these windows are pretty much the same, they just have different names. So like hierarchy and the world outliner, which is on the right side up there, tells you all the objects that are in the scene. Inspector and the details tell you on whatever object you've highlighted, all of the components on it, and like values and whatever. Project and content browser, those are the file systems that you'll find on Windows. It's a so it shows you like where all your assets are, and then console which is behind this by default, and output log just tell you the like readout status and any messages that you send inside of your code. Okay, so now I'm gonna switch over to Unity, and we'll get started. So I'm just opening up a project that I made earlier. I just did new project, and followed the prompts. I didn't change anything. It was like normal 3D project. Oh, and please, while I'm doing this, ask any questions. I can go further in detail on anything that I know, and I'd love to. Or just tell me to wait if you're trying to follow along. So, kind of put like some guiding notes here that you can follow along if you're doing it later. Okay. So first, we're going to put some stuff into the scene. The base scene doesn't really have anything in it. I think in Unreal it puts like some chairs and a table or whatever that you end up deleting anyways. So I'm just going to go here, right click, and put a plane. That's just going to be our floor. You can rename it floor. And then we're going to put a cube in. This cube is going to be our character. Or actually more fun to put a capsule in. Doesn't really matter, but capsules typically look more like players than cubes. So we want to add some kind of interaction to it. So where this kind of differs from Unreal is, in Unreal you turn it into a blueprint, I think like an actor or a pawn or something like that. And this, we're just going to make a script and apply it as a component. So every piece right here, so like this capsule, mesh renderer, all these pieces, they're a component. It's a C# script somewhere that Unity wrote, but we're going to make our own. So I'm going to create a folder here. I'm just going to name it scripts. It doesn't need to be called scripts, it's just organization. And then create C# script. And we're going to name it jumper. So you click on that, it'll open up Visual Studio. Mine might be way older because I haven't updated it.
2015.
Yeah.
If you double click on the script and it doesn't pop up Visual Studio, that means you didn't download it correctly.
Yeah.
Something's not set up correctly. So raise your hand and I can come around and try to help if it doesn't. And if you're on a Mac or Linux, Visual Studio looks different, so don't freak out.
I just completely pressed the wrong button. I was just trying to close a small window on the side and I closed the entire window. Unrelated. Okay, so the default C# script, anytime you make it, doesn't matter what you name it, where you make it, how you make it, they pop up with this start and update. So if you remember earlier I was talking about the game loop, that's where this update comes in. Every frame of the game, this update will be called. Start happens, it gives you a little note here, it's called before the first frame update. So if you want to initialize anything, you can do it there. If you don't want to initialize anything, you can just delete it. And then if you're a programmer and you're curious, mono behavior just kind of means you can place it in the scene. You can put it as put this script as a component onto an object, and has all the like functions and methods inherited from it. But so what we're going to do right now is we're going to make a quick script that will make the character jump every time you press the space bar. So we're going to do, see if I can do this off the top of my head. If input.get key down code dot space. So yeah, this is just one of the Unity functions, or yeah, the get key down, just one of the Unity functions that says we're getting, like, since the last frame has the spacebar been pressed. In your own travels, you'll just look this up in the documentation or autofill it from memory or from the thing telling you.
The autofill is super helpful.
It's so nice.
Like, it gives you everything in the autofill.
Yep. Okay. So now we're gonna do get component rigid body. Rigid body is a different Unity component that's just kind of like the physics of the object. So I don't think by default this capsule has one, but we'll add one in a minute. And get component, when you call it like on itself, on this object, it checks other components within the same, like under the capsule. It'll check the other component, see if it has one. So we'll get this component add force, because that's one of the functions under rigid body. And we'll just say, we'll call it jump force. I haven't declared it yet, but we will in a second. So then up here, we'll just make a public float called jump force and give it a default value of 100. That is supposed to be a vector. New jump force. Okay, so I'll give you a second to catch up on typing. I'm going to get rid of this start. You don't have to. So basically, all I did was I got the rigid body from this game object and then added a force that's in the y direction up. So now this is where the fun begins. So we're going to go back to the capsule, and we're going to add a component. First we're going to add our jumper script, so just jumper. You can also just take this and drag it in to the thing like this. We would add another. So we can see that our jump force, like public variable pops up with its default value. From here you can change the default value to whatever you want, which we'll use later to fine tune our jumps. And I was saying that we need the rigid body. So add a rigid body and we'll just leave everything default. This stuff changes like mass and just how the physics of the object handle. Okay. So now if we hit play, let's move the camera. So you can click on the main camera, drag it up, and then drag it into a position that works for you. And if we wanted to follow the capsule, it's simple as dragging it as a child of the capsule. Where in Unreal, you kind of would have to put the camera within the blueprint or have to kind of leave this screen to make things parent-child and like stuff within actors. Almost all of this is handled within the hierarchy, which is really convenient. So now, since it's a child of the first of the player, it will follow it. It'll keep its relative transform. So now, when you press the space bar, the capsule will be able to jump. And since we did no checking, if you're actually touching the ground, you can fly. Is anybody that's following along need me to slow down or?
Yeah, can you show the code again? Yes.
Yeah.
Also, make sure you guys didn't miss when he actually connected the script
See if
to
I
the
can-
object.
Yeah, let me see if I can make this bigger. Control plus.
I don't think that works. Might just have to-
Oh, yeah, there it is. Control scroll.
You made it go faster when you press up arrow. So now you can actually fly. Yes.
Maybe just make it jump so fast.
In general, or the new Bandit.
No, how do I get it to jump?
Okay, so go back.
I don't think your script is connected to your object, actually.
So go back to there. Stop there. Click on your thing. Oh, go back to your code and save because mine didn't show this. It doesn't show the value for you.
Yes, save it.
Yes. It
Or you can just do Command S.
It's like a
still didn't see it.
challenge. I can remember which one.
Are we good on this part of it?
You got it.
Go back and show.
So saving
How to connect stuff.
just saving just makes it like.
Yeah, it takes a little while for Visual Studio to communicate with Unity to rechange.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way.
If some of you guys aren't getting it to work, if you don't save the script, Unity won't have
Oh,
something to do
yeah,
with it.
okay.
So that's a big deal.
I did that.
Yeah, you did it
eventually. Yeah,
Yeah.
you have to save or else it won't apply, because it's kind of just editing it and then putting it into the file explorer. Completely slipped my mind. I save on Yeah.
Doesn't what?
I use it all for
The auto hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the Unity thing.
Does it say attached to Unity at the top?
Control, just click and drag.
No, okay, that means, so,
Here.
I think you go into the engine.
Visual Studio.
How did my thing fall?
I always did it from Visual Studio's installer.
Oh,
But
oh, you don't have Visual
Yes.
I don't know.
Okay, made again.
You made a game. You beat me to it.
Oh, you're installing the issue, and I didn't.
Yeah.
Where you get this to swing in a different
Yeah.
direction and do modify.
Just will.
Oh,
This is what it should.
so you already added physics.
Okay, so I'll go back here
That's why I done modify.
and
So where'd it go?
show again what I was doing with the
So it
capsule.
clicks up to a different.
So,
up to parent.
After you wrote the script, you need to apply it.
So,
So you can either take this right here and drag it,
What is?
either you can drag it onto the capsule like that, you can drag it over like right
and then that
there.
changes the,
I don't want to add it twice, but I did.
the,
A
the
little bit.
pivot, so that
But,
has the gravity vector on it.
So you, and then we also need a rigid body because our script referenced that we want our capsule to have physics. So you just go down here to add component and put rigid body into it.
Oh, okay, so you said it's does record work. So, yeah,
I guess I can come around and see.
Because,
I guess I'll go hop over there and see what's up. Okay, so I actually have one good point from helping her. If you create a C# script and then like don't rename it here, which is fine. You go over here, notice it says new behavior script here. But you come to rename it here and you say new script or something. Newer behavior script. And then you go back here. It doesn't change the name of it here. So that kind of gets you because now you can't, if this class name doesn't match the script name, Unity doesn't let you drag it onto like your capsule or your plate or anything in the scene. So like if I take this, try dragging it here, it says you can't add it because the script class can't be found. Because it's looking into this file for something that has the same name. So we'd have to rename this to new script. And now we should have that work.
Look at that.
Drop it. So if you go down to the bottom of your object,
There it is. So, yeah.
Add a new component to it, and I'm gonna add
So look out for that. I've had many troubles with that in the past. It's kind of something you have to learn.
close out of everything.
Okay, so now that we have something that's playable, one thing that is important to know is when you're in play, actually let me just make this not maximize on play. So you go to this game window, you click maximize on play, then it'll keep the like playing happening in like this screen. So while I'm about to talk about this, another important distinction between Unreal and Unity, which is the reason why I like Unity, the game window and the scene window are two different things. So game is like when you're in play mode, that's what it looks like. That's where you play it. Like you click on this window and you can do your jumping and whatever. I can still open the scene window while playing, make and edit. So if I'm just like, oh, I want to spawn in a new cube or whatever, I can make a new cube, and now my character can like jump up on it. Or if I want to put my character on it manually, so then you can just do quick iteration stuff. You can kind of do that in Unreal, like it allows you to edit stuff, but for some reason you can't like drag it around, at least I haven't found it. And then in VR, completely throw that out the window. For some reason it doesn't let you do that at all. So while in play mode, any that like I just added a cube and there's I moved my character. Any changes made in play mode will be reverted when you leave play mode, which is both a good and a bad thing. Sometimes it'll really like mess you up because you're just like, oh, okay, let me do this change, this change, this change, and then suddenly you're like, oh no, I was in play mode, and all those changes go away. But that's also helpful if you're trying to like, I'm just going to spawn in a million enemies and I'm going to just test it out like as it is, but I don't want to mess up my like scene. Edit preferences, color, play mode tints.
Bye, Griffin.
We don't need to do that now, but edit preferences. Colors, and then right here it says play mode 10. Just choose the color, green's
The
pretty
second
good.
half, I just focus on this
Blue
instead.
might be pleasing in your eyes. It's just a really helpful tool. It doesn't really make you do things better, but it might save you a lot of time.
Frustration from not realizing you're in play mode, trying to fix something.
Yeah, so, and I have that written down in the slides if you're not following along, you want to look at it later. Okay, so okay, so you might be thinking, okay, so we don't have these blueprints, so how do I make a collection of components or cubes or characters, or how do I make a collection of something and make multiple of them, because I'm going to have more than one goblin in my game. And it's actually really easy. So if we want, let's drag the main camera off of the capsule for now, because we can make a couple of these and I don't feel like messing with the camera. So drag that back up. Let's name our capsule jumper and add some features to it. So we'll add a cube as its like chest. And I'm just a quick shortcut, the Q, W, E, R, T keys change between like moving and rotation. Not really necessary to know because you can just click it up in the top corner here. But So add a cube, and let's just add, you can add whatever you want, but I'm just gonna put another capsule. I'm gonna rotate it, give it arms, and then I'll scale it so that they look more like arms. And we kind of have a character there, if you stretch your imagination. So, man. So I'm gonna go back down to my assets folder and create a new folder called Prefabs. Again, this is just organizational. You can name it whatever you want. It's not a special keyword or anything. And to make a collection of parts or whatever, I'm just gonna drag jumper into there, and you'll get a little. I actually like that picture. So we get a little picture of him. And then this will turn blue, saying that it's like a prefab. I think we'll go more in depth later on a bunch of advanced functions with prefabs, like applying changes or making prefab instances. But right now, what's important is we can now just drag straight from the content browser, or in this it's called project, as many jumpers as we want, and we can, oops, I grabbed the cube, and we can just drag them apart from each other. We can also make different, since each one is kind of like its own thing, its own instance of it, we can change like local variable, not local variables, but we can change variables inside of it independently of one another. So if I want to make one jump 1,000, one jump 10, and this one jump, we'll keep that at 100. They'll all be able to, like, if you don't apply the changes to the prefabs, they'll all keep that. They override whatever their defaults were. So if we go into play now, oh, I did. They all fall over. But that doesn't really matter. And you can edit if you want to edit all instances, or if you just want to edit what the prefab defaults are. You can click on it here, and it'll open up this other window. Kind of reminds me of Blueprints because it opens up its own window. But you can go in here and change any of its defaults. And so if we don't want them to fall over, we can go to this rigid body and freeze rotation on every axis, because then he won't be able to fall over or rotate. And then if we go back to, I guess if we just play, they shouldn't fall over. Yep. This camera. Let's see. Yeah, you get this nice camera preview down here, so you can see where. Unreal does that too, but. Oh, it's like a early 2000s rap album. So those changes that I made in the prefab, since you didn't make an override, or you didn't override it in any of the instances, it instantly applied to all of them. If you wanted to override them, like you want one to fall over, you would go into the instance and then change it. But again, we'll do that at a different thing. So now that's that. One thing that's really nice now, this has been a development since I started. I started working in Unity in high school, and it's not my senior year. But they added nested prefabs, which means that you can have prefabs inside of prefabs. And I was excited when they did that, because now we can make, if we just make a empty game object, which is like a scene component from Unreal, it has a location and that's it, just like a point. It doesn't show up in game, so you can just put any scripts on it that you want. And we'll name this jumper true. you can drag all three of these under jumper troop, and then turn jumper troop into a prefab. So now we can make another jumper troop and really fill out our space here. Oh, they're inside the camera. But yeah, as you can expect, these front three are exactly the same as the back three because I applied the, 10 is not even enough to get them off the ground. Because I applied the changes, and then if we want to see it on full screen, you click on that maximize on play. And that's that for nested prefabs. Let's see if I have anything else. Oh, wait, plenty of time. Okay, so since we don't have blueprints, we don't have a thing like a level blueprint. So any kind of functionality that you want where you have like, you just want how the scene can flow, you typically do it in a game manager. The game manager is absolutely nothing special. I could have sworn that, yeah, well, okay, I could have sworn that it gave like a special icon or something, but I guess not, or maybe it's spelled differently, I don't know. It's absolutely nothing special. You literally create another script that you would name Game Manager. That's where the special logo comes in. And you drag it onto your Game Manager there. And you basically just do everything inside this Game Manager that you would do in a level script. Like I said, it's actually nothing different than just making any other asset, but something that's, I suppose, worth noting, in level blueprints, you have to drag like a reference at, whenever I was making a dresser and I wanted the level blueprint to know when the dresser opened, I place the dresser in the scene, I take a reference to that instance of the dresser and put it in the level blueprint. Here we can do this by making like a public reference to a game object. So if we do public game object and just leave it uninitialized, or not. Oh, good. No.
Should you be in the game manager script instead of the?
That's not going to change that issue, but that will definitely fix my issue. Oh, I need to name it. That makes sense. Okay. So we make this public game object, or let's name it Jumper Prime. And you obviously, like any other variable, you can just reference Jumper Prime here. But I don't have any functionality that I'm thinking about right yet. So Jumper Prime should show up. Did I save? Should show up in this image. Oh, it's something, new script, didn't save. So yeah, the console tells you whenever you have any compiler errors or whatever. So now that all my compiler errors are done, my other scripts, it shows up. So now we have this Jumper Prime reference with nothing in it. Well, if I want a specific jumper to be Jumper Prime, I can just drag it in with drag in the reference there. So now, whatever we do inside Game Manager will affect that specific instance of jumper in the scene. So then when you save the scene, it'll save that reference. So typically, if we gave, and you don't really need to follow along at this point, but if we just gave jumper a string that's its name, and then in Game Manager we spam the console with whatever name of jumper prime, which to output to the console you do debug.log, or you can do debug.log error if it's something erroneous, but normally it's just debug log, and then we'll say jumper prime's name is, and we'll just put, so we have to jumper prime dot get component, because jumper prime is the game object. It's like just the capsule is the main game object. Get component jumper, because that's where we stored the name, and then name. Is that making sense? It's a bit more programming heavy, but we're pretty much just saying go to the thing we've designated as jumper prime, and then get a component from jumper prime. So this one's jumper, and then go to this jumper and then get its name. So if we name this thing Jack, and we name another one Bill, then since we have the reference of Jack put into the game manager, Bill's not printing out because it's only, the game manager's only looking at Jack. So if we look at the output log, we have 702 messages of jumper prime's name is Jack. So yeah, any questions? Anything you're more curious about?
Could you use the asset store and create some like simple scenes from the assets from the asset store? I don't know.
Are you saying like can I or
That'd be a good example.
are you able to? Because you're definitely able to. Asset Store has its own window here. It's similar to, it's the same thing as Unreal's Marketplace.
Maybe like calling that.
We have a whole section for free assets. So if we did 2D stuff, sure. I don't know how long it'll take to download, but I don't want to sign in. Okay, so theoretically you could do that, and it would, you'd just be able to put these into your scene. See if I put anything else. So we're doing really well on time because I actually got to show up earlier than I thought. Okay, so some common Unity functions. Oh, okay, we can look at some of the documentation as well as just where you're putting most of your code, pretty much. So like we said before, there's start and update. There's also awake, which I don't remember exactly what it is, but we can look it up really quickly. Awake, I believe, is when the like object is first like instantiated inside the scene. So start would happen first, but let's check. Come on, behavior. So yeah, use the initialize anything before the game starts. And if one thing, so just to rag on Unreal a little bit, a lot of times it felt like their explanations of things was one sentence or it was like a tooltip or something. We have whole paragraphs including how to use them on Unity, so this is why I love it. So yeah, you can put it in just like that, and it'll happen before start. Other similar ones, there's fixed update. You do physics stuff in that because it happens at a regular interval. I think that's pretty much all of those that I use. Just kind of normal mono behavior things you could, yeah, late update, yeah, pretty much that's that. And then the manual, like I was saying, is where you go when you want to learn, like, oh, what is the rigid body? So because we used the rigid body earlier, you can either look at the scripting reference for it, but you're probably not going to do too much scripting using it. You're probably just going to put it in the scene and then mess with it. So it tells you specifically what every piece of the, like what every variable inside of it does. So yeah, that's pretty much all I had planned. So if anybody wants to mention or ask something. Yeah.
One little thing I was curious, with the vector we use to move the rigid body,
Yeah.
it only has 2 parameters?
Vector 3 doesn't has 3 parameters. Did you do vector 3 or vector 2?
Yeah, I have vector 3. Or I guess,
It has an overload. So are you familiar with like
I am not.
function overloads? So programming stuff. If you have a class that you want to instantiate, you can create multiple constructors for it. And so vector 3 has a couple. So if we do vector 3, new vector 3, it gives you this like 1 of 3.
Oh.
So you can either instantiate it with no parameters. It makes it, I think it makes it a 0 vector. You can go down. You can see. You can instantiate it like it's a 2D vector and it makes z equals 0.
Okay.
Or you can do all 3, so you can do it however you want.
That's cool.
So, yeah. I guess we kind of look at the anatomy of just an object that you like spawned in. So when we spawned in the floor, for example, every game object has a transform. So it says where in the scene it is. If you have something like an empty game object, like a game manager, just make it 0, 0, 0 so you can find it. And then in this case, we have a plain mesh and mesh renderer. That's because you want to see it. And then the collider, so that like physics stuff can stand on top of it. Don't think I'll get into like on collision enter stuff, but that's something that we use a lot for like collisions. You have a box collider, and then you have the on collision enter, on collision exit events. So it has events like Unreal does, but
We're going to do that next
you
week.
look into it more.
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever we do that. Okay.
So I didn't get why do we choose game manager, like creating a game manager? Is it just because it would prevent us from like writing the same code for each prefab, or
Yeah.
like, when should we use that?
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of unclear because it's a bit more like implementation, like every implementation has a different thing. But if you kind of stick to calling it game manager and then putting stuff for the level, so typically it would be like, say we have our jumpers and we want to name this jumper troop as a group of enemies. And you could say, in your game manager, you might want to have a reference to every jumper troop in your scene for whatever processing reason, like you want to be able to destroy them all at the same time or something like that. Or have them report to, like report to something. In the game manager, you can keep it's typically just to keep references to things and then kind of keep the level flow. You could also do something like if you have a level with checkpoints or something, you do checkpoint, like have an array of your checkpoints inside the game manager rather than having it in multiple different cubes in the scene. Historically, what I've put in it was like I have a separate one that would be like audio manager or a second script, but I put it on this like game manager thing so that it would all be in the same place. So I just add another component, put audio manager, and then anytime that I wanted audio, I would call a function on there to say play this sound. But it's kind of just, I was just kind of saying that it replaces the level blueprint from Unreal. Or it doesn't really replace it because it's kind of your like own user-defined thing, but that's kind of what I was going into saying. Like Unreal is less or is more handhold or like more strong-arming you into building it a certain way, and then Unity is a bit more do-it-yourself, but it'll be easier because you're the one that made it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, I think that covers it for today. I put this slide so that you'll remember me when you look at this again, hopefully, especially if you have a job offer, that'd be nice. And then I have some good links here. This Bracky's YouTube channel, definitely check it out. He has an entire series of tutorials on how to make a 2D game, how to make a first-person shooter, how to make a tower defense game, and I've looked through those. But yeah, he posts like every Sunday or something. It's crazy. But he also has more in-depth, not in-depth, like advanced stuff if you're trying to see like stuff about particle systems and stuff like that. Unity has a lot of good tutorials. This is just one that I've used before. They give you all the assets at the beginning, and like you can just follow along using exactly what they're using. And then I just relinked the game loop article because I found that interesting, like just low level, what is a game engine doing? So, all right, thanks for listening.